The next type of transport, railways. Now, railways, as there are three divisions written down in red, you can see broad gauge, you pronounce it as gauge, meter gauge, and narrow gauge. Now, broad gauge over here, you can see over here the distance 1.67 meter is the gap. Now, gap between what? Gap between the two railway tracks. That's why they are called broad gauge. Meter gauge, as the name suggests, will have 1 meter distance or 1 meter gap over here written. And then you have narrow gauge, where the distance is less than a meter. The gap is less than a meter. Now, let me tell you one thing. Narrow gauge you will find only in the toy trains, hilly areas, the small trains that are there. They run on narrow gauge. Coming to the advantages of railways. Point number 1, fast. Point number 2, large carrying capacity. One train can carry, if it's a goods train, it carries a huge amount of goods, and if it's a passenger train, it carries a large number of passengers. Cheap and convenient for long distance. Always for long distance traveling, from one point to the other, for long areas or long distances, railways are preferred over roadways. Last point, safe and comfortable. Now, railways are safer because there are less number of accidents compared to roadways. And comfortable, the journey of the railway is much more comfortable than that of the roadways. But again, there are its own share of disadvantages. Point number 1, inflexible. Railways are not flexible mode of transport. If there is one problem in the railway track, then and there the train stops till the problem is solved. So there are no other ways by which the train can move. Uneconomical for short distances. For short distances, roadways are better. They need large capital investment, obviously. You require a huge capital investment to lay down the railway tracks. And they cannot provide door-to-door service. Unlike roadways, railway cannot provide door-to-door service. A very common example I'll give you. If you are traveling to Darjeeling, the railway takes you to New Jalpaiguri or NJP. From there, you have to take the roadway, either bus or car. Okay, so that shows that railways cannot be there in every remote area of the country. Why? Because there are certain conditions which the railway requires in order to set up railway tracks. Amongst that, level land is one point. The land has to be flat, otherwise it is difficult in a rugged terrain in high altitude areas. There has to be a high population density, otherwise there will be no demand for the railway, and without demand it will not be profitable to run the railways. Less forested areas. Now the area has to be less forested, otherwise you cannot lay down the railway tracks. Another point you may know is in areas where there are more rivers, crossing the river means bridges have to be constructed, so that increases the cost. Now these are the advantages and disadvantages of railways and roadways that we have got covered in this part of the chapter. Now, a few questions are given over here for you to solve. They all are on give reasons, because simple questions of advantages, disadvantages is too easy for you to write. So use your brain a little, use your concept a little and answer these questions. Point number 1, roadways are more common than railways in India. Why? Second give reason, railways are more common in northern plains. Why? Third, too many rivers are a problem for the railways. I said just now, if you are attentive, you must have listened. And Golden Quadrilateral has helped India's economy. Now, these 4 questions you will write either in exercise book, or if you don't have the exercise book, then in sheets of paper. Keep them ready. You will submit this on the day that the school reopens. In the next class, we will be doing the other remaining part of the chapter, that is airways and waterways.